You can have a good salary, a stable job, and everything society calls success, and still feel like something is deeply wrong. Some people eventually realize they're not actually chasing their dreams, they're chasing bills, approval, status, and a finish line that keeps moving further away. And when they quietly step off that treadmill, people often call them lazy, unambitious, or lost. But psychologically, something much deeper may be happening. You know those people who just vanish from the corporate ladder? Not in some dramatic quit my job and travel the world Instagram post kind of way, but quietly. One day they're climbing, networking, optimizing their LinkedIn profile, and then they're just gone, living in a smaller house, working fewer hours, driving an older car, and somehow they seem weirdly okay with it. While most people are grinding harder, adding certifications, angling for the next promotion, there's this entire group of people who've just quietly stepped off the treadmill. And according to research from the University of Bath, published in 2023, their brains might actually process reward and status differently than the people still racing. Stay with me because what I'm about to tell you will completely change how you see success, ambition, and what it actually means to win. Let's start with why most people stay in the race. Because here's the thing, the rat race isn't some conspiracy. It's deeply, almost beautifully aligned with how human brains evolved. Your brain has this ancient system called the myeloid pathway. It's your reward circuit, and it lights up like a Christmas tree when you get promoted, when your salary increases, when someone important validates your achievement. A 2019 study from Cornell University found that status rewards activate the same neural pathways as food, sex, and addictive substances. Your brain literally treats a job title upgrade like a hit of dopamine. But it goes deeper than that. We're tribal creatures. For 300,000 years, your survival depended on your position in the social hierarchy. Higher status meant better mates, more resources, protection from the group. So, your brain evolved to be obsessed with climbing. It's not shallow, it's survival instinct dressed in a business suit. And modern capitalism, it's built a near-perfect dopamine delivery system. Small wins, constant feedback loops, visible metrics. You hit your quarterly target, you get a bonus. The bonus funds a lifestyle upgrade. The lifestyle upgrade requires the next bonus. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill. And research from Princeton University shows that it keeps resetting your baseline for what feels like enough. So most people aren't weak or brainwashed for staying in the race. They're just following 300,000 years of evolutionary programming that says climb higher, earn more, gain status, secure your position. Their brains are working exactly as designed. But then there are the others, the people who get to a certain point on the ladder and just step off, not down, not up, off. They take the job with better hours and worse titles. They move to the cheaper city. They stop caring about the metrics that used to define them. And from the outside, it looks like they've given up, except they haven't. Here's what nobody tells you. Their brains might actually be processing the same information differently. A fascinating 2021 study from the London School of Economics tracked people who voluntarily downshifted their careers. What they found was striking. These individuals show different patterns of activation in the prefrontal cortex when evaluating trade-offs between money and time, status and autonomy. Essentially, when most people's brains see more money, the reward centers fire. But for the quiet exiters, the activation was muted, not absent, muted, like their brains had somehow recalibrated what registers as rewarding. Now, before the comment section explodes, this isn't about one brain being superior. Both are valid responses to modern life. But understanding why some brains make this shift is where things get really interesting. For most people who quietly exit the race, there's a moment, not always dramatic, often subtle, but a moment when the equation changes. Sometimes it's burnout. Dr. Christina Maslach's research at UC Berkeley on occupational burnout shows that chronic workplace stress literally reshapes your brain's threat detection systems. After enough years of high-pressure performance, your amygdala, that ancient alarm system, starts treating your inbox like a predator. The rat race stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like survival. Sometimes it's a health scare. You're 42 and your doctor uses words like pre-diabetic or stress-induced hypertension. Suddenly, the corner office feels less like an achievement and more like a slow-motion suicide. Sometimes it's watching a parent die with regrets. Sitting in a hospital room while your father whispers that he wishes he'd worked less, traveled more, known his grandkids, and something in your brain just clicks. But here's what's fascinating. According to research from the Journal of Positive Psychology, published in 2020, the people who successfully exit the race often share a specific cognitive trait. They score higher on what psychologists call temporal discounting flexibility. Basically, their brains are better at valuing future well-being over immediate status gains. Most human brains heavily discount the future. A reward today is worth way more than the same reward tomorrow. It's why we eat the cookie, skip the gym, take the promotion that'll wreck our health in 5 years. But some brains, either through genetics, experience, or conscious rewiring, can actually feel future you as vividly as present you. When they imagine themselves at 65, exhausted and wealthy, it feels real enough to compete with the dopamine hit of today's achievement. That's not weakness. That's a different kind of intelligence. Let's talk about what goes into the decision to exit because it's not simple. It's not just work less, stress less. There's a complex psychological equation happening. First, there's identity dissolution. Your job title has been your answer to what do you do for years, maybe decades. It's how you introduce yourself at parties, how you measure yourself against old classmates, how you know if you're winning. A 2018 study from the University of Michigan found that career identity is so deeply embedded that losing it triggers the same neural patterns as grief. When you step off the ladder, you have to answer the question, who am I if I'm not climbing? Second, there's social pressure. Your brain is wired to care what the tribe thinks. When you downshift, you're violating the social contract. People will ask if you're okay, if you got fired, if you're having a crisis. Their concern is genuine, but it's also an immune response. You're deviating from the script, and that makes people uncomfortable. Research from Yale University shows that people who make unconventional life choices often face what psychologists call social comparison anxiety. You're at the dinner party and someone asks what you're up to. You say you're working part-time so you can garden and read. The conversation gets weird because you've just reminded everyone else that they made different choices and maybe those choices aren't making them happy. Third, there's financial fear. Real, legitimate fear. You're earning less, saving less. Your retirement projections look different. What if you're making a massive mistake? What if future you is broke and bitter? Studies from the Financial Psychology Center show that downshifters report higher anxiety about money even when their actual financial situation is stable because they've lost the upward trajectory that felt like safety. And fourth, there's the loss of the game itself. Here's something that sounds contradictory, but stay with me. Some people actually miss the stress. They miss the clear metrics, the competition, the adrenaline of high-stakes performance. Research on achievement motivation shows that high performers often get addicted not just to the rewards, but to the challenge itself. When you exit the race, you lose that structure, that clarity, that sense of measurable progress. So the quiet exits aren't escaping into some blissful, stress-free paradise. They're trading one set of problems for a completely different set. Here's where things take a turn. You'd think people who exit the race would be happier, right? Less stress, more time, more autonomy. And some studies show exactly that. Research from the University of Oxford found that people who prioritize time over money report higher life satisfaction. But then there's this other body of research. A 2022 study from Stanford followed people who downshifted their careers for 5 years, and what they found was more complex. Yes, these people reported lower stress. Yes, they had better work-life balance. But they also reported something unexpected, a kind of existential anxiety. Without the external structure of achievement, they had to figure out what actually mattered to them, and that's terrifying. When you're in the race, your goals are clear. Make more money, get promoted, hit the targets. But when you step off, you have to decide what you're optimizing for. And most people have never actually asked themselves that question. Some people discover they were using career achievement to avoid deeper questions about meaning and purpose. The race was a distraction from the fact that they didn't know what they actually wanted from life. So when they exit, they don't find peace. They find themselves face to face with questions they've been running from. Others find something different. They discover that without the constant dopamine hits of achievement, they have to learn how to be okay with less stimulation, less validation, less proof that they matter. And that's a genuinely difficult psychological adjustment. Dr. Laurie Santos at Yale calls this hedonic adaptation in reverse. You're teaching your brain to find reward in things that don't trigger the same neural fireworks. It's retraining your entire reward system, and it's hard. But here's what people who successfully exit the race often discover: a completely different kind of freedom. They're no longer making decisions based on what looks impressive to other people. They're making decisions based on what actually feels good to them. And that shift, according to research on self-determination theory from the University of Rochester, is associated with higher intrinsic motivation and sustained well-being. When you're in the race, you're always comparing, always measuring, always checking if you're ahead or behind. But when you exit, you lose the scoreboard. And without the scoreboard, you have to develop internal measures of success. Did I spend time on things that mattered? Did I show up for the people I love? Did I feel present in my own life? These sound like platitudes until you actually live them. Then they become radical. People who exit often develop what psychologists call locus of control flexibility. They stop needing external validation to know if they're doing okay. They trust their own judgment more. They're less reactive to other people's opinions, not because they don't care what anyone thinks, but because they've done the hard work of figuring out what they think. And here's something beautiful. Many of them report experiencing time differently. When you're in the race, time is a resource you're constantly running out of. It's the enemy. It's what you're trying to hack and optimize and maximize. But when you exit, time can become something else, a space to inhabit, a medium for living. Research from the Journal of Happiness Studies shows that people who work fewer hours report experiencing time as moving more slowly, not in a boring way, in a present way. They notice seasons changing. They remember their weeks. They feel less like they're skimming across the surface of their own lives. Let me tell you something that'll mess with you. People who quietly exit the race aren't necessarily born different. Many of them train their brains to want different things through deliberate practice, through exposure to different values, through enough pain that the old equations stopped making sense. A 2023 study from the University of Pennsylvania looked at neuroplasticity in adults who made major lifestyle changes. What they found was that with sustained effort, people could actually reshape their reward pathways. The things that used to light up their brains, status symbols, competitive wins, started producing less activation. And the things that barely registered before, time in nature, deep conversation, creative projects, started producing more. You can literally rewire what feels rewarding. But it's not easy. It's not a decision you make once. It's a decision you make every day. Every time you choose time over money, every time you disappoint someone's expectations, every time you resist the urge to compare yourself to the people still racing, you're fighting against 300,000 years of evolution that says, climb higher. And that takes a very specific kind of courage. Here's what nobody tells you about the people who quietly exit the race. They're not giving up. They're choosing a harder game. The race has clear rules, clear metrics, clear ways to know if you're winning. But the life after the race, that's ambiguous. That's uncertain. That's a game where you have to define the rules yourself. And that takes more psychological strength than most people realize. These are people who can tolerate the discomfort of other people's judgment, who can sit with financial anxiety without letting it drive every decision, who can face existential questions about meaning and purpose without running back to the safety of achievement metrics, who can rebuild their identity from scratch, not around what they do, but around who they are. That's not weakness. That's not failure. That's a kind of emotional resilience that most people never develop because they never have to. So, if you're someone who's quietly exited the race or thinking about it, here's what you need to hear. You're not broken. You're not unmotivated. You're not settling or giving up or failing to reach your potential. Your brain has just recalibrated what it considers rewarding. And that recalibration might be the most intelligent thing you've ever done. You're not broken. You're trained. Trained by experience, by values, by a vision of a good life that doesn't fit the standard template. And that training is valuable even when it's lonely. The people still in the race aren't wrong. They're following valid evolutionary drives toward security and status. But you're following something else. A drive toward autonomy, toward presence, toward a life that feels like yours. Both are legitimate. Neither is superior. They're just different optimization strategies for different values. And if you're struggling with it, if you're anxious about money or identity or what people think, that doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you're human. You're navigating a path that doesn't have a map, that's supposed to be hard, but you're not alone in it. There's a whole quiet community of people who've made the same choice, who understand the trade-offs, who know what it costs to step off the treadmill, and who've decided that what they gain, time, autonomy, presence, peace, is worth what they lose. That's not just psychology. That's poetry in motion. The rat race will always be there, the ladder will always exist, and some part of you might always wonder if you should climb back on. But here's the thing. You can't unknow what you know now. You can't unfeel the relief of stepping off. You can't unlearn the fact that there are other ways to measure a life well lived. So, if this resonated with you, if you're one of the quiet exits or thinking about becoming one, know this: your hesitation is wisdom. Your anxiety is awareness. Your choice to prioritize time over status, presence over achievement, peace over performance. That's not failure. That's evolution. If you found yourself in this video, consider checking out my next one on the psychology of people who need very little to be happy. And if you want to support this channel and get early access to videos like this, there's a join button below. Either way, thanks for being here. You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're not missing out on some fundamental human drive. You're just playing a different game. And maybe, just maybe, you're finally realizing that the goal was never to win a race you didn't remember choosing in the first place. Because that's the strange thing about the rat race. Most people enter it so gradually that they never notice they've entered. There isn't a starting line. Nobody hands you a number and says, "Congratulations, you're competing now." It happens through small decisions. Get good grades, get a degree, get a stable job, earn more, buy a better car, move into a better neighborhood, work a little longer, take the promotion, upgrade the house, save more. Then one day you look around and realize you've spent years optimizing your life for a definition of success that you never consciously created. And that realization can be uncomfortable because it forces you to separate what you actually want from what you've simply been taught to want. That's much harder than it sounds. If everyone around you is chasing the same things, questioning the chase can make you feel almost irrational. You start wondering whether you're the strange one for wanting less. Maybe you don't need the bigger house. Maybe you don't care about the expensive car. Maybe you don't want the executive title. Maybe you'd genuinely rather have an ordinary Tuesday afternoon with nowhere to be than another promotion that gives you more money but takes another piece of your time. And once that thought enters your mind, it becomes very difficult to completely ignore it. You start noticing things you used to overlook. You notice how often people complain about being busy but still compete to become even busier. You notice people talking about retirement as if life begins after 65. You notice how often conversations revolve around salaries, promotions, investments, houses, schools, status, and productivity. And you begin asking a question that can feel almost rebellious. If we're working this hard to eventually have more time, why are we sacrificing so much of our actual time to get there? That's when time starts becoming psychologically different. Money is visible. You can put it in an account. You can count it. You can compare it. Time is invisible, and because you can't store tomorrow's afternoon in a bank account, it's easy to treat it as unlimited. But it isn't. Every hour spent working is an hour that cannot be recovered. Every evening you miss because you're answering emails is an evening that exists only in memory. Every weekend sacrificed for a deadline is a weekend that won't come back in exactly the same form. People who quietly escape the rat race often become painfully aware of this asymmetry. Money can sometimes be replaced. Time cannot. And once your brain genuinely understands that, your priorities can begin to shift. You might still want money. You might still enjoy achievement. You might still want to do excellent work. Escaping the rat race doesn't necessarily mean becoming financially irresponsible or abandoning ambition completely. Sometimes it means redefining ambition. Instead of asking, "How much can I achieve?" you start asking, "What kind of life can I build?" Instead of asking, "How high can I climb?" you ask, "Where do I actually want to stand?" That's a completely different psychological question. Because achievement without direction can become an endless loop. You reach the goal, feel good for a little while, and immediately create another goal. The promotion becomes the next promotion. The salary target becomes the next salary target. The house becomes the bigger house. The successful business becomes the larger business. The finish line keeps moving because the system was never designed to give you a final answer. And eventually, some people realize that they're not actually addicted to the destination. They're addicted to movement. They feel uncomfortable when they're not improving, growing, upgrading, competing, or progressing. Rest begins to feel like falling behind. A quiet year feels like a wasted year. Doing less feels like becoming less. That can be one of the hardest habits to unlearn. Because when your identity is built around progress, standing still can feel like failure even when you're perfectly happy. You could spend an afternoon reading a novel and enjoy every second of it, but a small voice inside your head whispers that you should be doing something productive. You could take a long walk without tracking it, but part of you wonders whether it counts as exercise if there isn't a number attached to it. You could sit with your family for 3 hours, but your mind keeps calculating all the work you could have completed during that time. The quiet exit often begins when someone stops obeying that voice automatically. They start asking, productive for what? That's a powerful question, because productivity is only useful when it serves something meaningful. If you're becoming incredibly efficient at building a life you don't enjoy, efficiency isn't necessarily the solution. Sometimes the problem isn't that you're not moving fast enough. It's that you're moving in the wrong direction. And this is where people who quietly leave the rat race can become misunderstood. From the outside, their life may look smaller. They may work fewer hours. They may earn less. They may live somewhere less impressive. Their career trajectory may appear flat. Their social media may become quieter. They may stop posting achievements altogether. But internally, their experience can become much larger. They have time to notice things. They notice the weather changing. They notice their child developing a new habit. They notice that their parents are getting older. They notice that their neighborhood has a different atmosphere early in the morning. They notice that they actually enjoy cooking when they're not rushing. They discover hobbies that had been buried underneath years of exhaustion. They start remembering conversations instead of just surviving through them. And that may be one of the strangest consequences of leaving the race. Life can begin to feel slower without actually becoming less meaningful. When you're constantly rushing, you experience life in fragments. Monday becomes Tuesday. Tuesday becomes Friday. Friday becomes another deadline. Months disappear. Then suddenly another year has passed, and you struggle to remember what actually happened. But when your schedule has more space, ordinary moments can become memorable. You have enough mental bandwidth to actually experience them instead of simply moving through them. That's why someone might willingly trade a larger paycheck for a shorter commute. They aren't necessarily valuing money less because they're careless. They may be valuing the 2 hours they get back every day more highly. 2 hours sounds small until you multiply it. 2 hours a day becomes 14 hours a week, hundreds of hours a year. Over several years, that becomes an enormous portion of your life. And suddenly the question isn't, why would you accept less money? The question becomes, what exactly are you buying with the extra money, and what are you selling to get it? That question can completely change how someone thinks about work. Maybe the person who refuses the promotion isn't afraid of responsibility. Maybe they have already calculated the hidden cost. More meetings, more emails, more travel, more stress, more people depending on them, less flexibility, less time with family, less energy at the end of the day. The salary increase may be real, but so is the cost. And once someone starts evaluating life in terms of trade-offs rather than appearances, the conventional ladder can lose some of its psychological power. Because every better option comes with a price. A bigger house means a bigger mortgage. A higher position can mean greater responsibility. A prestigious career can mean less freedom. A larger business can mean less personal time. More possessions can mean more maintenance. More recognition can mean more pressure to maintain the image. The quiet exit isn't necessarily about rejecting these things. It's about finally looking at both sides of the equation. And that requires a level of self-awareness that isn't always comfortable. Because once you know what you're giving up, you can't pretend the trade-off doesn't exist. You start asking yourself questions that don't have easy answers. How much money is enough? How much work is enough? How much recognition is enough? What would I still do if nobody knew I was doing it? What would I choose if there were no social status attached to the decision? What would my life look like if I stopped trying to impress people who aren't actually living my life? Those questions can be terrifying because they remove the scoreboard. And when the scoreboard disappears, you have to decide what winning means to you. Maybe winning means having enough money to feel secure without spending your entire life earning more. Maybe it means being able to take a random Tuesday off without asking anyone for permission. Maybe it means having energy when you get home. Maybe it means being present for your children. Maybe it means having enough mental space to create something. Maybe it means living somewhere quiet. Maybe it means being able to wake up without immediately feeling dread. Maybe it means having no desire to explain your choices to anyone. There isn't one correct answer. That's the uncomfortable beauty of leaving the race. You become responsible for defining your own finish line. And that can be harder than following somebody else's. Because when you're following the standard path, you always have something to measure yourself against. There are rankings, salaries, titles, houses, achievements, milestones. You know where you stand. When you create your own path, there may be no external confirmation that you're doing well. You have to trust yourself. And trusting yourself becomes especially difficult when everyone around you is moving in the opposite direction. Imagine leaving a high-paying career while your friends are getting promoted. Imagine choosing a smaller home while your former colleagues are buying larger ones. Imagine working 4 days a week while everyone else is bragging about working 60 hours. Even if you're happier, comparison can still whisper that you're losing. That's because the human brain doesn't evaluate success in isolation. We naturally look sideways. We compare our circumstances with the people around us. And if everyone appears to be moving upward, choosing a different definition of upward can feel like moving backward. This is why quiet exits are often quiet. People don't necessarily want to announce, "I'm leaving the game." They simply stop playing. They stop explaining, they stop competing, they stop checking what everyone else is doing. They quietly rearrange their priorities and allow their life to become less impressive and more personal. And there can be something deeply powerful about that. Because eventually, you reach a point where you don't need your life to look successful from the outside. You need it to feel sustainable from the inside. That's a completely different standard. And sustainable is a word we don't talk about enough when we talk about success. Can you maintain this lifestyle for 10 years? Can your body handle it? Can your relationships survive it? Can your mind handle the pressure? Can you still recognize yourself at the end of it? Because something can be profitable and still be psychologically expensive. Something can be prestigious and still be exhausting. Something can look like success and still leave you feeling empty. And the people who quietly escape the rat race often become less interested in appearances because they've experienced the difference between looking successful and actually feeling okay. They learn that peace doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it comes with an ordinary life that you don't constantly need to recover from. And once you've experienced that kind of peace, going back can feel strangely difficult. Not impossible, just difficult. Because you now know what the alternative feels like. You know what it feels like to have an afternoon that belongs entirely to you. You know what it feels like to finish work and still have energy. You know what it feels like to say no without immediately feeling guilty. You know what it feels like to make a decision without asking whether it looks impressive. And those experiences can permanently change the way you evaluate success. You may still work hard, you may still dream, you may still build things, but the question underneath everything becomes different. You're no longer asking, "How can I get more?" You're asking, "How can I have enough of what actually matters?" And maybe that's the point where escaping the rat race stops being about running away from work and starts becoming about moving toward a life that feels more intentional. Because the real escape was never simply leaving the office. It was leaving the belief that your worth depends on how far you climb. It was realizing that your job is something you do, not the complete definition of who you are. It was understanding that a smaller life on paper can sometimes be a much bigger life in experience. And once that distinction becomes clear, the latter doesn't necessarily disappear. You simply stop assuming that you have to climb it. So maybe escaping the rat race was never about becoming less ambitious. Maybe it was about becoming more intentional about what your ambition is actually serving. Because there is nothing wrong with wanting money, success, security, or achievement. The problem begins when you sacrifice your health, your relationships, your time, and your sense of self without ever stopping to ask whether the trade is worth it. The people who quietly step away aren't necessarily giving up. They're choosing a different scoreboard. Instead of measuring their lives by titles, salaries, possessions, or how far ahead they are, they begin measuring success by freedom, presence, meaningful relationships, peace, and time. And maybe that's the most important realization of all. You don't have to win a game just because everyone else is playing it. If your version of a successful life looks different, that doesn't automatically mean you're falling behind. It may simply mean you've finally started asking a more important question. Not, How far can I climb? But what kind of life do I actually want to live? Because at the end of the day, you can't take the promotion with you. You can't take the title, the bigger office, or the approval of strangers. What you have is the life you actually experienced, the mornings you were present for, the people you made time for, the moments you didn't rush through. So if you're quietly stepping off the treadmill, don't assume you're lost just because you're no longer running in the same direction as everyone else. Maybe you're not falling behind. Maybe you're finally moving towards something that matters to you.